Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Truth on the Tracks. I'm Brandon Turbeville. If you are here listening to this broadcast due to an attendance at the guest lecture that I did last week, or because you have picked up one of the flyers left at the many different locations that you may have passed through with a list of websites and information, then a special welcome to you. Please stick with us for the full hour here. We're going to be talking about several different things. And for those of you who may be new to the show, again, I'm Brandon Turbeville. This is Truth on the Tracks. You can catch this show here every Monday night and Friday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on ucy.tv. You can also access the show's personal page at ucy.tv/TT for Truth on the Tracks. Again, I'm Brandon Turbeville, and I'm a staff writer for Activist Post at activistpost.com. If you want to follow the articles that I write there, you can go to the home page and follow that news feed as the articles come out in real time. But you can also go to the Contributors tab, click on that, and you can find some of my more recent articles listed under the staff writers section. Click on my name and you can find a recent archive of my articles there for Activist Post. Now, I'm also the author of 4 books, and hopefully we'll be having a 5th book coming out here in the very near future in a matter of months. But if you want to take a look at those books, you can go to falseflagpublications.blogspot.com, and that has a list of the books. It has a picture of the books, and it has an easy access Buy Now button there. If you want to buy it, you can also click on the Buy Now button. It doesn't automatically charge you. You can go to the site where it will tell you what the book is about and some information about the book, how long it is, and so forth. You can also go to thebookpatch.com to find more about those books. Now, if you want to keep track of what I'm doing individually, of my work specifically, then go to brandonturbeville.blogspot.com. Again, that's brandonturbeville.blogspot.com. This is the website. It's a backup blog, and I post all of my articles that I have published at Activist Post. I publish the archived versions of this show in YouTube video format as they come out. Granted, they do come out later, much later than the show is broadcast, but they will be there. And I also post up the interviews that I do with various other alternative media outlets. Now, I'm going to make some improvements to the site here in the near future. Hopefully, it's going to take some time because I work with limited time and limited technology and certainly limited funds, but I'm hoping to expand this website, so keep checking back brandonturbeville.blogspot.com. Hopefully, maybe have our own domain here in the future, but we'll see how things transpire. More on that. There have been some changes. The links at the top of the page now. You can find the bio information. You can find contact information for me. You can find other relevant sites and links to other sites that I am in contact with and that I contribute to, and so forth. And you can also find links to this radio show there, and you can find links to the book. So the top links have changed, so go check those out. And I also want to bring your attention to a foreign language blog, brandonturbeville.russia.blogspot.com, and this is the sister site to brandonturbeville.blogspot.com. It's got all the same stuff on that site as it does on the main site, brandonturbeville.blogspot.com. Only it's in Russian. So we decided to put this site up. We had a lot of Russian readers on my main site, so I thought perhaps we could create a backup site similar to the main one in Russian. So if there's any readers or listeners in Russia who would prefer to read those articles and that information in their native language, then that is available to them, and that site does seem to be taking off right now. It's just shortly after we put it up. Again, that's brandonturbeville.russia.blogspot.com. But here's the qualifications. Here's the unfortunate part of this website is that it's done by Google Translate, and Google Translate is not exact, and I don't speak Russian, so I'm not able to really tell how good of a translation it is. It's probably broken Russian, but broken Russian is better than no Russian at all, I would suppose. So if you do speak Russian, then feel free to let me know what it looks like. Also, it doesn't have any hyperlinks, and this is again is the language barrier. If you have accessed that site and have read the articles and information in Russian and you don't have links to information, then go to brandonturbeville.blogspot.com, and if you need the articles hyperlinked, then they'll be there. I apologize for that, but again, I don't speak Russian. I don't have anybody that can help me in that regard. I do everything myself, and I mean everything myself. But the hyperlinks and the citations are available on the English site, but not the Russian site. So this is also an opportunity for any of the listeners, any of the readers who have plenty of free time on their hands. If you want to, if you're bilingual, if you want to take my articles, translate them into a foreign language and post them up on your own site or a site dedicated to my work, that's fine. I don't care. Go for it. I encourage translations of my work, and I encourage the free distribution of that work. Now, that's the panhandling section of the broadcast. It's longer than it usually is, but these are developments. I haven't had the show to myself for some time because I wanted to bring some of these good guests on. Of course, some local people here. We had Chris Young of Wilmington, North Carolina, on last week of Christopher Young's blog list. .blogspot.com, and we had Alan Moore on. He's also local here in Florence, South Carolina, of AriesTacticalSolutions.com, and we're going to be bringing you some more individuals on the local level, as well as ranging from the different spectrum of the alternative media, some experts and so forth. I will continue to bring some guests on, but it's important to do this solo sometimes in order to further the ideas of solutions-based activism, the things that are on my radar. It's usually what I do, and I'm going to do that here tonight. But again, to anybody who picked up one of those flyers, one of those little yellow flyers, one of those little pieces of paper with the website list on them, or if you had attended the guest lecture that I conducted last week, then a special welcome to you. I want to draw your attention to some other solutions-based activism here, and we have PalmettoGunRights.org. This is a South Carolina organization based here in South Carolina, obviously, and it's pro-gun rights based on the platform of no compromise for gun rights. So check these guys out, PalmettoGunRights.org. We need a platform for gun rights, not like the No Rights Association, the NRA, who constantly compromises your rights. It takes your money, laughs all the way to the bank. But this is, we need a programmatic solution to this assault on gun rights. No compromise at all. That's what we need. Now, also, you will be familiar with the United Front Against Austerity because I talk about them generally week after week. You can find them at againstausterity.org, and this is economic solutions. These are economic solutions. These are not laissez-faire capitalism based on Austrian school libertarian economics. This is also not socialism or communism. This is the American system of economics. Some of the programs, I think, some of the platforms in terms of the war on drugs, in terms of civil liberties, could be better, but by and large, they're a good platform. Especially the war on drugs platform could be much better, but at this point, I think that we need to focus too on economic solutions, and this is the organization to do that. We're going to be talking about some of the things that the UFAA and myself and hopefully others of goodwill have in common here when I talk about the 1% Wall Street sales tax. Now, a quick note on on some upcoming elections. We have in Marion County, South Carolina, the mayoral elections in Marion, the city of Marion, South Carolina. We have Mayor Rodney Berry and former mayor and former mayor pro tem Bobby Davis, who is challenging Rodney Berry. Now, what can we say about this? Yes, it's small town elections, but I'm in the region, so I feel the need to comment on this. Right? We have not much in the way of campaigning. We have lots of signage, from what I can tell, lots of signage. If we tone down the signage and supplemented that with substance, that would be much better. But in my experience, that's not going to happen. So, what can we say about the mayor himself, Rodney Berry? I've spoken to the mayor, very polite man, but Mayor Berry supports I-73, and I do not support I-73. I-73, of course, will be the interstate that will be built in order to bypass some of the state highways and U.S. highways that go through the small towns of South Carolina and do contribute greatly to the local economies because of the beach traffic, the Myrtle Beach traffic going through the area. Currently, the only way you can get to Myrtle Beach, there's no interstates that get to Myrtle Beach, just U.S. highways and state highways. So people are forced to get off the interstate in Florence, to get off in Dillon, or get off in some location lower in the state of South Carolina, and drive through the U.S. highways, state highways, and go through some of the small towns, stopping at convenience stores, at the restaurants on the way, and contributing to the local economy. I-73 will kill that. Now, the plans drawn up, of course, state that businesses will grow. Of course, businesses will grow. I'm sure you'll get an Exxon station. I'm sure you'll get a Waffle House. You'll get a Huddle House and maybe a hotel. All pathetic low-wage jobs here and major corporations. What you will also see is the further shriveling up of small-town South Carolina for what little bit exists. And this, in the Florence County, the Marion County, I'd say the PD region, including Dillon County and some of Horry County, you'll see these businesses disappear in favor of McDonald's. Of course, will just move. The smaller businesses can't. And we have issues of eminent domain. Eminent domain will be used for this stupid interstate here that's going to come through, which will benefit Myrtle Beach probably, but to the detriment of everywhere else. Also, the wetland destruction. We will be destroying numerous areas of wetlands here in South Carolina for the interstate, for the benefit of so-called tourism here in Myrtle Beach. So, no to I-73. What's the solution to I-73? It's very simple. Stop it. Scrap it. Don't do it. It's not necessary. It's not needed. It's the wrong position to take. It's the wrong step to take. So just drop this. But unfortunately, Mayor Berry is not willing to do that. So sorry, you strike one, Mayor Berry. Now the challenger, Bobby Davis, former mayor pro tem, actually did serve as mayor to my knowledge. That would make him the first black mayor of Marion, South Carolina. That's interesting history, of course. But what's the program? I don't see a program. That's interesting history, but unfortunately, making demographic history does not qualify you to be mayor. He did serve as mayor, though. That is noted. But again, what's the program? I see no program. I see general, vague suggestions here, and these are things like we need jobs, we need better education. Yeah, fine, we do, but how are you going to do it? What's your plan? I don't hear that from anybody. Only thing I hear is I-73. Now, I don't know the position of Bobby Davis on I-73. Perhaps we'll find out in the next week or so. But I say all this just to point out that the Marion city elections, not worth voting at this point. Stay home. Do something better with your time. Don't support people without programs. Don't support people with programs that aren't legitimate and aren't helpful to your location, to yourself as an individual and your community. And I-73 certainly not. And I hear it may very well be the case that Davis supports that as well. We'll have more about that in the future. So there's that. Now, I also want to draw your attention to an article. We've done many since the last time I've had the floor of my own show, actually, due to forces of nature, I guess we should say, an act of God before I had this show to myself the last time. And we've gone over a lot of different things. Perhaps if we have time, we'll continue to go over some more things. But the seminal article that I want to draw your attention to, perhaps the most important article that I've done in recent months, is the case for the 1% Wall Street sales tax. This is the article that we're going to be talking about here, and that's the title of the article, The Case for the 1% Wall Street Sales Tax, which you can find at activistpost.com. It's not on the main page. Again, go to the Contributors tab, click on my name, and it'll come up. It's also up at brandonturbeville.blogspot.com. But the case for the 1% Wall Street sales tax. And this is the argument for obviously the 1% Wall Street sales tax, which is a programmatic demand that we can work toward. This is also the spearhead demand from the United Front Against Austerity. And I want to go into this article. I want to read this article here on air and go through the various points, because you need to understand why the 1% Wall Street sales tax is needed, why it's the right thing, what it will do, and why it should be used as a demand, why it's better than the alternatives. And the article was published on February the 25th, so you'll notice it begins mentioning the March 1st sequestration, yet another fraud imposed upon the American people under the likewise fraudulent fiscal cliff nonsense that was bandied about in the mainstream media, the fear-mongering over the budget deficit, the fear-mongering over the debt ceiling and so forth, the fear-mongering of government spending. What this is just a cover for, cutting government spending, is cover for austerity measures, right? But we'll go into that here in this article. So again, the article, The Case for the 1% Wall Street Sales Tax, up at Activist Post. You can Google that. Brandon Turbeville, Activist Post, The Case for the 1% Wall Street Sales Tax. It will come up. And but let's just get into this article here briefly. As the March 1st deadline rapidly approaches for what has been termed the sequestration, the majority of Americans seem unable to do anything other than sit idly by and wonder to themselves what programs and agencies will be cut under the guise of balancing the budget, reducing the deficit, and cutting government spending. Unfortunately, by applying terminology to the latest crisis in Congress, such as the debt ceiling, the fiscal cliff, and now the sequester, the mainstream media, along with the relevant government agents, major banks, and corporations, are able to hype the population into a state of hysteria and fear, for those that actually pay attention to anything other than the latest television show, so that the general public will be thoroughly convinced that the only way to avoid imminent disaster is to reach a compromise in the form of cuts, firings, and a general reduction of the standards of living. In reality, the creatively named sequester is nothing more than a semantic jargon devised for the purposes of the implementation of austerity measures against the American people. It is quite clear that although the sequester itself exempts many social safety net programs in terms of its automatic spending cuts pending a failure of Congress to reach an agreement, the social safety net is very much on the table in the course of those discussions. Now, it did affect some social safety net programs. I believe unemployment was one of them. While not openly labeled as austerity measures, the growing cuts to the American social safety net and U.S. critical infrastructure, coupled with alarming increases in taxes for low-income to upper-middle-income workers, should leave no doubt as to what is actually taking place within the United States. Although nomenclature and terminology may be different in the public discourse, make no mistake that Americans have much more in common with the Greeks, Spanish, Irish, and other austerity victims than they may wish to admit. Largely at the forefront of any budgetary discussion in the United States is the issue of government spending as it relates to programs such as Medicare, Social Security, Medicaid, unemployment insurance, food stamps, etc. Programs that have been given the politically charged name of entitlement programs in order to associate the spoiled child mentality with programs that have actually been funded by the taxes of working people during the course of an entire lifetime. Constant propaganda from both pillars of the false left-right paradigm have contributed to the brainwashing of the American population regarding the programs mentioned above. Most notably, claims that the United States cannot afford to maintain a social safety net system without vastly increasing taxes or simply abolishing the programs altogether are reported back to uninformed constituencies of both political parties to be parroted back to the political parties themselves in times of national debate in the form of mandates and demands. From libertarians who oppose social safety net programs on ideological grounds, as promoted by the Rockefeller family, remember the Mount Pelerin Society, and conservatives who have money and expect to continue to have money, hence the lack of concern for anyone who may not enjoy their level of comfort at the moment, to socialists who are willing to bleed the average citizen for everything he is worth, for little in return but that which government decides is appropriate, and liberals who are willing to both fleece taxpayers and compromise the programs these taxes would allegedly go to support. It is clear that the working men and women of the United States and those who have been victimized by Wall Street parasitism and the folly of free trade are left completely alone and to themselves. Yet, amongst all of the reasons put forward as justification for the dismantling of the social safety net, few mention the Wall Street bailouts and the $27 trillion worth of credit extended to bankrupt institutions under the concept of too big to fail. Likewise, few tend to mention the financial costs of administering a global war of terror on virtually every continent or the development and maintenance of a police state here at home. Neither are the consequences of prosecuting an unbelievably stupid and non-productive war on drugs discussed when it comes to questions of what should be cut from the federal budget. Instead, the talk immediately turns to the social safety net and the programs that are currently keeping millions of Americans alive. Yet there is a more immediate and preferable way to address the concerns regarding the social safety net than any raise in taxes on an American population that is already taxed to death or by the dismantling of the social safety net system. This new method of support for the social safety net system is as simple as the Wall Street sales tax, a move which would solve both the crisis of the social safety net as well as the general budgetary crisis at all levels of government in the United States of America. The Wall Street sales tax should be applied at the rate of 1% to financial market transactions such as stocks, bonds, flash trading, e-trading, high-frequency trading, debt instruments, and the notional value of derivatives. A reasonable exemption of $1 million per person per year should be enacted in order to prevent the placement of taxes on individuals who shift around personal financial assets or make investments for their 401k or other retirement account. The 1% tax should be paid by the seller of the instrument, not the buyer, and the proceeds accrued from the tax should be split evenly between the federal government and the states. Now, I'm going to repeat that paragraph again, because this is the key part of the programmatic aspect of this Wall Street sales tax. Wall Street sales tax should be applied at the rate of 1%, not anything lower, but at least 1%. Remember, you pay close to 12% in some states as an individual. 1% to financial market transactions such as stocks, bonds, flash trading, e-trading, high-frequency trading, debt instruments, and the notional value of derivatives. An exemption of $1 million per person per year. That's in order to prevent taxes on individuals who are shifting around personal financial assets, making investments in the 401k, preparing for retirement in that manner, and that sort of thing. This tax does not apply to cashing your paycheck. This tax does not apply to shifting money around in personal savings accounts, checking accounts. No, this is a financial transaction tax on institutions for these high-frequency trading, debt instruments, derivatives, flash trading, bonds, stocks, those sorts of things. Now, we'll get into this later, but the 1% tax should be paid by the seller of the instrument, not the buyer. Proceeds from the 1% Wall Street sales tax should be split evenly between the federal government and the states. Now, the following is a brief explanation of how this program would achieve such a lofty goal and how it should be implemented in order to achieve its maximum effect. In short, it is the argument for the creation and implementation of the Wall Street sales tax. We have a few sections here that we'll go through. It's the case for the 1% Wall Street sales tax. Here's number one. Wall Street pays no tax. Wall Street banks are, by definition, corporations. However, like most corporations, or most major corporations that are supposed to pay a 35% tax on their profits, Wall Street banks pay almost none of the corporate income tax. That is, many of them pay nothing at all. For instance, according to statistics procured by Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont and Citizens for Tax Justice, Goldman Sachs, one of the most infamous zombie institutions, only paid 1.1% tax on its total profits in 2008, the year of the worldwide derivatives crisis. Although Goldman Sachs actually earned a profit of $2.3 billion that year, it also received a $278 million tax refund from the IRS. As Webster Griffin Tarpley points out, quote, "This scandalous situation did not prevent Lloyd Blankfein, Goldman's boss, from appearing on CBS television to demand draconian cuts in the meager entitlement payments received by the poor, the sick, and the old." End quote. In 2010, Bank of America also paid no corporate income tax, even though it had earned profits of $4.4 billion. Yet it also received a tax refund from the IRS. In Bank of America's case, however, the refund was the sum of $1.9 billion, with a B, dollars. It should also be pointed out that Bank of America received over $45 billion, with a B, billion dollars with a B, from the U.S. Treasury and $1.3 trillion, with a T, in zero interest credit from the Federal Reserve during the financial crisis of 2008. Bank of America was able to repeat their tax dodge again in 2011. Likewise, Citigroup paid 0% corporate income tax on $4 billion profits, while Wells Fargo paid nothing for at least the years 2008, 2009, and 2010. Now, we're going to come up here on the break here for a second for station identification, but if you'll stay with us for just a minute or so and catch us on the other side, we'll be back with more of the case for the 1% Wall Street sales tax. Stay with us, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you for listening to UCY.TV. I'm Jim Funky, the host of Boiler Room Radio. Join me every Wednesday night at 10 Eastern here on UCY.
The brink. We are on the brink, but of what? No one knows. It depends on the reference frame that you're looking at it from. On the Brink with Jeff Weverson.
We have been nuked. Did you know that? Check out Nuked Radio on UCY.TV Tuesdays and Thursdays from 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time with Radchick and Jules. Stay safe, everyone.
UCY.TV. The future is in your hands.
I'm Brandon Turbeville, staff writer for ActivistPost.com. You can catch Truth on the Tracks every Monday night at 9 p.m. and Friday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here on UCY.TV.
I'm Madison Rupert, the host of End the Lie Radio here on UCY.TV every Monday at 7 p.m. Pacific and 10 p.m. Eastern. Tune in every Monday here on UCY.TV.
You're listening to UCY.TV. Real news, real people.
This is Josh from Anti-Tyranny News Radio here on UCY.TV. You can catch me 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern on Fridays, and catch all the great hosts here on UCY.TV.
Catch Before the First Cup with Jules, Monday through Friday, 9 to 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time at UCY.TV/BTFC.
UCY.TV, we took the red pill.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is Truth on the Tracks. I'm Brandon Turbeville. For those of you who have just joined us, we're talking about the case for the 1% Wall Street sales tax. Go find that article, my article up there at Activist Post. You can just Google my name with Activist Post and the case for the 1% Wall Street sales tax, and you should find the article. As a matter of fact, if you just go to Google and type in Wall Street sales tax, my article is the first one that comes up, so we've been getting some good circulation, and that's good. So before the break, we were mentioning the fact that Wall Street pays no tax. Wall Street banks are corporations. By definition, they're supposed to pay 35% tax on their profits, but they don't. And it's found, Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont and Citizens for Tax Justice came up with the documents, right, where Goldman Sachs only paid 1.1% tax on its profits in 2008. It earned $2.3 billion that year and received a $278 million tax refund. Bank of America in 2010 paid no corporate income tax. Even though it had profits of $4.4 billion, it still received a $1.9 billion tax refund from the IRS. And then there was the fact that Bank of America also received $45 billion from the U.S. Treasury and $1.3 trillion in zero interest credit from the Federal Reserve during the 2008 derivatives crisis. They dodged their taxes again in 2011. Also, Citigroup paid 0% corporate income tax, even though they had $4 billion of profits. Wells Fargo paid nothing for 2008, 2009, and 2010. Now we'll take this up with some comments by Webster Tarpley in one of his articles. I linked to that in mine. This is what Tarpley says, quote, "Another spectacular example of Wall Street's tax dodges is General Electric, which long ago ceased being an industrial corporation and became a hedge fund and drag built around its financial arm, GE Capital. GE racked up worldwide profits of $14.2 billion in 2010, but managed to avoid the federal corporate income tax completely. Instead, GE accountants were able to secure a $3.2 billion refund from the U.S. Treasury. This happened even though GE was laying off 21,000 U.S. workers and closing 20 U.S. factories over the years 2007 to 2009. And these results were typical of GE's performance over the most recent decade. GE paid a 2.3% tax rate on profits during 2002 to 2011 and succeeded in paying zero federal corporate income tax in 2002, 2008, 2009, and 2010. The scandal is made even greater because GE boss Jeffrey Immelt was serving as Obama's business liaison in his capacity as chairman of the White House Council on Jobs and Competitiveness. Rapacious predators like Immelt apparently believe that good corporate citizenship starts with evading all taxes," end quote. All of this open tax evasion is, of course, contrasted by the meticulous methodology used to fleece the average American taxpayer for every single cent possible. However, aside from the obvious personal income, corporate income discrepancy, Wall Street banks also pay no sales tax on their immense number of transactions that occur in the form of derivatives, stocks, bonds, debt instruments, and other so-called financial products. This is, of course, in direct contrast to the fact that individual Americans pay anywhere from 6% to 12% on transactions involving a variety of goods ranging from entertainment to necessity, even groceries in some areas, depending on the state. As Tarpley writes in this regard, quote, "This outdated approach goes back to when the stock and bond markets were considered capital markets. But today, in the era of high-frequency trading and flash trading in which one computer can carry out 1 million trades per second using algorithms, we are obviously dealing with a high-tech gambling casino that poses grave dangers to the public. In short, the greatest single flow of untaxed money is the stocks, bonds, and derivatives which cross the exchanges in New York and Chicago, as well as the over-the-counter derivatives which are contracted behind the scenes. If sacrifices are required, this is obviously the place to start," end quote. Obviously, when the suggestion is made regarding the implementation of a tax on such a wide variety of financial instruments and such a powerful cartel of corporate and banking interests, the next logical question turns toward the possibility and method of successful implementation. Thus, it is important to note that between the years of 1914 and 1966, the U.S. federal government did successfully implement a financial transaction tax of between 0.04%, which is 0.0004, and 0.1%, which is 0.001. Right? Although the amount of tax percentage is much smaller than the 1% being discussed in this article, the ability of the federal government to operate and maintain such a tax is clearly demonstrated. Indeed, current tax policy shows that the U.S. federal government is still capable of maintaining a tax on financial transactions, as the Section 31 fee, a minute tax of 0.0034% on stock transactions, is used to fund the Securities and Exchange Commission. In 1998, this amazingly small tax brought in $1.8 billion to fund the SEC. 0.0034% brought in $1.8 billion in 1998. Imagine what 1% would bring in. We're going to get to that. New York State even has a very small financial transaction tax on their law books that brings in close to $25 billion per year, according to some estimates. But ever since the 1970s, all of the money earned by this tax is given straight back to the Wall Street bankers due to threats made by financial institutions that they will move their operations to another state in order to avoid the tax. It should be pointed out, of course, that a nationwide federal tax would effectively neutralize any threats by financial institutions to move out of New York or any other state in order to negotiate lower or no taxation. Another important point is that for the most part, financial instruments such as stocks, bonds, futures, options, and indices, and virtually all of their other various incarnations and combinations, are traded through public exchanges. Thus, they can easily be tracked for the purposes of taxation. Yet, as Webster Tarpley points out, quote, the real motherlode of transactions is to be found in the area of derivatives, end quote. Unfortunately, because the main applicable legislation in regards to over-the-counter derivatives, the Dodd-Frank bill, fails to force the institutions and individuals engaging in such trades to report them, it is somehow harder to determine the actual amount of these instruments. This is also partly because over-the-counter derivatives take the form of private contracts between counterparties. Thus, due to the lack of reliability on the exact number of these instruments, it should be specified that the 1% Wall Street sales tax should be paid by the seller, not the buyer. Furthermore, it should be specified that any over-the-counter derivatives contracts for which the 1% Wall Street sales tax has not been paid cannot be enforced in a court of law. This would effectively mean that if the seller of an over-the-counter derivative does not pay the 1% Wall Street sales tax on this product, the buyer that loses out on the derivative would then be able to legally back out of the deal with the backing of the law behind them, thus turning the tax-dodging seller into the ultimate loser. So in other words, you have this incentive to pay the tax. According to Webster Tarpley's estimates, world derivatives currently stand, quote, in excess of $2 quadrillion in notional value, end quote. Other estimates put the notional value of derivatives in the larger range of $6 to $7 quadrillion due to the fact that these derivatives are constantly being bought and sold. Thus, the revenue that would be generated from a 1% Wall Street sales tax could be expected to reach a figure of approximately tens of trillions of dollars. I'll repeat that. The revenue that would be generated from a 1% Wall Street sales tax could be expected to reach a figure of approximately tens of trillions of dollars. Of course, any new form of taxation on the trading of financial products would more likely than not cause the amount of trading currently taking place to go down, with some possibly ceasing altogether. Even in this event, it is reasonable to assume that the Wall Street sales tax would still provide several $1 trillion in tax revenue. Now let's look at Section 2, another point in the case for the Wall Street sales tax. The Wall Street sales tax discourages dangerous forms of speculation. As mentioned above, the implementation of a 1% Wall Street sales tax would naturally cause the amount of trading of the effective financial instruments to go down. It is even possible that the trading of some exotic forms of these instruments may cease altogether. But while this may seem to present a problem in terms of reduced tax revenue, this should largely be the only concern. Even so, as mentioned previously, the expected revenue of the 1% Wall Street sales tax is still in the figure of several trillion dollars. Still, it is fundamentally important to understand that the reduction in derivatives trading, computer-based transactions, and speculation is by no means a negative development. After all, it was derivatives that were responsible for the 2008 financial crisis that has spread and continues to spread concurrently across the entire globe. Financial speculation has been responsible for the rise in consumer prices and staple goods, as well as those goods that have become virtual necessities in today's society. In addition, debt instruments have been instrumental in attacking the currency and economic stature of sovereign nations. Thus, if the trends of speculation, derivatives trading, computerized transactions, and debt instruments are reduced or even eliminated, one would be hard-pressed to provide a clear and convincing argument outside of the most militant ideology that could justify their return. Even in the unlikely event that projected tax revenue does not reach the levels estimated in this article and by economists such as Webster Tarpley, the reduction in the financial instruments listed above should itself be considered a positive outcome. As Tarpley writes, quote, "A society which taxes the sales of industrial, manufacturing, and agricultural products, but which establishes a tax exemption for speculation, derivatives, and financial services, has tilted the playing field in favor of a parasitical casino economy of the type which has historically led to widespread immiseration and recurring financial panics." End quote. Section 3. The 1% Wall Street sales tax is completely constitutional. Acknowledging the many legitimate issues taken with the income tax by individuals across the political spectrum, the fact is that the constitutional question of taxation is not applicable to the 1% Wall Street sales tax. Although the 16th Amendment clearly allows for the collection of an income tax, there does exist some controversy as to whether or not the individual is required to pay this tax by law. Setting that issue aside, however, and yeah, by the way, the income tax, by and large, this should just be eliminated for individuals. But setting that issue aside, however, in terms of, it should be eliminated in terms of mandatory participation by most individuals. Setting that issue aside, however, there is no controversy surrounding the constitutional applications of the various sales taxes currently in effect. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1 of the U.S. Constitution clearly enumerates the ability of Congress to impose such taxes. It states, quote, "The Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises, to pay the debts and to provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States. But all duties, imposts, and excises shall be uniform throughout the United States." End quote. Thus, the 1% Wall Street sales tax exists well within constitutional boundaries. Any challenges to the 1% Wall Street sales tax would effectively seal their own fate before getting off the ground due to hundreds of years of legal precedent and clearly defined, in this regard, cases of imposed taxation. In the case of the 1% Wall Street sales tax, there is no legitimate constitutional or legal argument against its implementation. Any individual that argues against the implementation of the 1% Wall Street sales tax without subsequently arguing for the removal of all forms of taxation is essentially lobbying for a double standard between individual citizen laborers and Wall Street parasites. To agitate against the Wall Street sales tax is to agitate for taxation on the transactions of the poorest citizen, while at the same time providing a free ride for rich bankers and vampiric financial institutions. This agitation, if realized, would entirely remove the burden of funding of the federal and state governments off the shoulders of the wealthy Wall Street bankers and thrust it onto the backs of the poor, working, and middle class alone. Those individuals who state their undying respect and love for the U.S. Constitution should recognize the 1% Wall Street sales tax as an opportunity to both reduce the federal and state budget deficit as well as the influence of Wall Street in a clearly constitutional manner. Section 4. The 1% Wall Street sales tax largely solves the budget deficit and social safety net funding crisis. The Congressional Budget Office has estimated the U.S. federal budget deficit at the end of 2012 at close to $1.1 trillion. In addition, each U.S. state maintains a budget deficit with the exception of Alaska, Arkansas, Montana, North Dakota, West Virginia, and Wyoming. measured in the millions to billions of dollars each. As reported by State Line, the news reporting agency of the Pew Charitable Trusts, the total of all state budget deficits combined equals to $111.9 billion. However, while a $1.1 trillion American budget deficit I have this number written out, and it's going to take me a second. There's so many zeros. We've reached that point. $1,112 billion American budget deficit at first sounds like an impossible number to bring under control. One must bear in mind the estimates of just the initial revenue from the 1% Wall Street sales tax. As mentioned above, such proceeds are conservatively projected to reach the level of several trillions of dollars. More optimistic and even perhaps more accurate estimates suggest revenue in the range of tens of trillions of dollars. With proceeds of these numbers divided evenly between the federal government and the states, both the federal and state budget deficits could be eliminated after the first intake of revenue is completed, all without cutting and gutting the social safety net, reducing military spending, or slowing the operation of government agencies. With the proceeds of the 1% Wall Street sales tax flooding the coffers of the federal, state, and local governments, proponents of austerity measures could then be seen as the irrational, pro-monopolistic agitators that they are. Section 5. The 1% Wall Street sales tax is the best option. Broadly speaking, in terms of the social safety net programs, the federal and state budget deficit issues being discussed during congressional sideshows such as the sequestration, the 1% Wall Street sales tax is not only the best option in terms of convenience, fairness, and positive results, it is the only method capable of actually achieving the goals for which it is created. Competing approaches either fail to achieve the necessary revenue, levy unfair taxation, or produce results which are entirely counter to any rationally desired outcome. The most obviously abhorrent method of reducing or eliminating the budget deficit and managing the funding of the social safety net is that of austerity. This approach is essentially the cutting of services, government labor, and government spending, which is more often than not accompanied by an increase in the taxes of the lower, working, and middle class. Even aside from the desired results and moral implications of such a program, austerity measures are inherently foolish in terms of reducing deficits and funding programs, and that this method has failed on every occasion where it has been implemented. In reality, austerity measures only create bigger budget deficits and financial crises than the next fiscal year. Regardless of the success or failure of austerity, however, such methods are the antithesis to those who desire a rational, civilized society. Any discussion of austerity must immediately be dismissed as foolishness and insanity. Likewise, any discussion of raising the income tax or the implementation of a federal sales tax other than the 1% Wall Street sales tax should immediately be abandoned. Higher taxation on an already overtaxed citizenry will only serve to reduce the amount of economic activity in the long run and to further burden those suffering the most in what can only be described as a worldwide economic depression. Propositions such as the fair tax should be included in this delineation, as they are by nature regressive taxation and impose heavier burdens on the poor, working, and lower classes. These types of taxation cut only into the amenities of the rich, but cut deeply into the necessities of the poor, despite tools like the prebate discussed by the proponents of the fair tax. You check that out if you want, but it's just what this article said it is. It's regressive, and it's not feasible. In the same vein, a wealth tax, like the one being proposed by various sources such as David Altman of the New York Times, presents numerous undesirable effects in addition to falling short of attaining any real revenue. Any program that would require such an extensive census of personal wealth and taxable assets is not only bound to face innumerable constitutional challenges, it will require a virtual police state to enforce and administer. Regardless, it is also a fact that wages are much harder to hide from government investigation than other forms of income and assets, such as those favored by rich elitists who are able to hide their assets away in various offshore accounts. Let me just go back and repeat that, mainly because I butchered it when I was reading it. Regardless, it is also a fact that wages are much harder to hide from government investigation than other forms of income and assets, such as those favored by rich elitists who are able to hide their assets away in various offshore accounts. funds and foundations, thus continuing to leave massive loopholes for Wall Street parasites and wealthy financiers while cracking down upon the average American worker. Even if the wealth tax is able to accrue the optimum amount of money its proponents argue it can deliver, it pales in comparison to the 1% Wall Street sales tax in that it could not exceed over several $100 billion of yearly revenue. The 1% Wall Street sales tax, on the other hand, is estimated to rake in several $1 trillion in revenue at the very least. It should also be pointed out that the 1% Wall Street sales tax is the only option that actually discourages dangerous speculation and encourages tangible production. So here's the conclusion. The United States now finds itself in an unmistakable crisis situation. Caught in the grips of a worldwide economic depression, the U.S. now faces the perils of imperialism abroad and the imposition of a police state at home. In addition, the United States faces increasing economic destabilization, unemployment, fraudulent food shortage, health and healthcare crises, environmental degradation, and the ultimate collapse of the availability and the ability to provide for the basic necessities of life. In short, the United States, along with the rest of the world, is facing the very real possibility of a complete collapse of civilization as we know it and subsequent imposition of fascism on a global scale. As Greece, Spain, Ireland, and many others continue to be hammered by austerity measures, the United States is falling prey to the same philosophies and political smokescreens. Yet the United States stands at an even greater disadvantage than its European counterparts due to the fact that Americans are unfortunately still unable to understand the nature and dangers of austerity. Thus, the dismantling of what was once the economic powerhouse of the world is taking place virtually unbeknownst to those who stand to become its greatest victims. However, there are solutions readily available whenever there exists the will to take hold of them. In relation to the crisis of the social safety net, as well as the U.S. and state budget deficit, that solution exists in the form of the 1% Wall Street sales tax. Most of the current American financial quagmire can be traced back to the antics and schemes of Wall Street at some point or other. The lack of adequate funding for the U.S. government can be directly related to the fact that the burden of funding falls on the backs of the poor, working, and middle class, while Wall Street pays nothing. This free ride afforded to Wall Street must end. The 1% Wall Street sales tax is the sole method that it can attract revenue in the range of tens of trillions of dollars capable of fully funding the social safety net and the U.S. government, as well as effectively eliminating the budget deficit at the federal and state levels. All of this while discouraging dangerous forms of speculation and derivatives trading. Contrary to many other proposals being floated in the public arena by often questionable sources, the 1% Wall Street sales tax is entirely constitutional. And lastly, the last section here, support the 1% Wall Street sales tax. While the concept of taxing Wall Street turnover has been circulating for some time, the credit for the revision, fine-tuning, and detailed articulation of the 1% Wall Street sales tax should largely be given to Webster Griffin Tarpley. Tarpley.net is his website. Current agitation for the 1% Wall Street sales tax is being undertaken most notably by the United Front Against Austerity, a coalition of wide-ranging organizations attempting to inject and promote economic solutions based upon the American system of economics, independent of the false left-right paradigm and the two existing major parties. As Paul Adams writes for Activist Post, quote, contrary to what many popular and pessimistic economists say, the U.S. and world economies can return to booming economic growth within 2 or 3 months. Contrary to what the Malthusian global elites espouse, there can be plenty of food, clothing, and shelter for everyone once we support skilled labor and the production of real goods rather than cancerous financial speculation. Indeed, the solutions are there for the taking. However, since the political will does not currently exist among elected politicians, and the corporate government system obviously does not want to see them implemented, it is up to the American people to demand the 1% Wall Street sales tax immediately be enacted. Idle spectatorship is no longer an option. Active participation is the only legitimate path to take. The reader is encouraged to visit the United Front Against Austerity website at againstausterity.org. Now, in the remaining few minutes that I have left, I want to speak to any of the listeners who may be, again, who maybe found this broadcast because of the flyers that were passed around or sitting around in Marion County, in Florence County, in Dillon County, Horry County, other counties in the South Carolina, North Carolina region, or some of the individuals who may have attended the guest lecture that I did on 9/11. Again, a special welcome to you and thank you for being here, but I want to point you in some directions. Now, if you like what you heard about the Wall Street sales tax, and I certainly hope you do, because this is one of the few legitimate solutions out there, and it should be a spearhead demand. It's something that's clearly attainable, and there is some momentum now that's gathering worldwide, and especially here in the United States, in this regard. And it would be wise to ride this train if we can, and to push this through, to save our social safety net at least, and use that as a springboard for further political activism and political struggle. Now, the United Front Against Austerity is behind this largely as a spearhead demand. You can find them at againstausterity.org. And Webster Tarpley, who I mentioned repeatedly in that article, very fine economist. He's a historian. He's a great writer. He's got many books. Surviving the Cataclysm is a great book. Of course, 9/11 Synthetic Terror. You can find all those books at tarpley.net. That's Webster Tarpley's website. I want to point you also to, again, activistpost.com. Activist Post is the site that I'm a staff writer for, but I'm not the only person that's a staff writer there, nor am I the only contributor to that website. Lots of good stuff up there, lots of wide-ranging articles, lots of informative things that come up on that site. If you want to keep up with what's going on day to day in the political arena, and even go further afield and experience or take a look at, express interest in other things that are a little further afield than that, then that's the site to go to, activistpost.com. You should check that site out every day, because it's updated 2 or 3 times a day, every day, throughout the night, and it's a great site to keep up with in any event. Of course, my site, brandonturbeville.blogspot.com. That's where I put all of my information up, my articles, my radio show, my radio interviews, brandonturbeville.blogspot.com. I also want to point you to Alan Watt. Alan Watt is also a historian, and he's followed the overarching agenda that's been taking place for centuries now, and he can trace this back in terms of the nuts and bolts of the history of the foundations and NGOs and the think tanks that were started at the turn of the 20th century. He could go further back and discuss Freemasonry, the Illuminati, the real Illuminati, not just the infotainment that you hear in some random YouTube videos, things that people repeat over and over. But this is the actual history of these Illuminati bloodlines and Freemasonry and those types of things. If you want to find out about that, then go to cuttingthroughthematrix.com. Cuttingthroughthematrix.com is Alan Watt's site. He's got a show called Cutting Through the Matrix as well. You've got to find his stuff on iTunes and download the shows, download his talks, and they're unbelievable. Get his books, Cutting Through Volume 1, 2, and 3, and his DVDs, Reality Check, which you can order through his website, cuttingthroughthematrix.com. Also, David Icke, somebody who's been a groundbreaker, who seems, at first, when you hear some of his material, it seems to be a bit out there, but when you really check up on what he's saying, it's not out there at all. It actually makes a lot of sense, and you can find his website, davidicke.com. That's David, ICKE.com. So I hope I've given you some information to start off on, and if you found this broadcast through those flyers, then good. Please come back next week. And we're going to be here Monday and Friday night. We're rebroadcast on Friday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here on UCY.TV, UCY.TV/TT for Truth on the Tracks. UCY.TV, this is Truth on the Tracks. I'm Brandon Turbeville. We'll see you next week.